Hi, I'm Ann Rasmussen, and I'm excited to be able to share with you today. We are living in strange times, and it feels like time is going by slowly and fast at the same time. We were talking as a family the other day about Naomi coming home from college in March when they closed everything down. In some ways, that feels like a really long time ago. And then at the same time, Caden, our son, finished classes at the beginning of May, and that feels like a weird time thing as well. So, both kids are ready for their next adventures. Caden's going to be in Grand Junction for school in the fall, and then Naomi, her campus is closed in California, but she's going to go to Salt Lake and do everything online from there with some friends and to encourage the church. But we'd all kind of hoped that things with COVID-19 would be in a different place by now. We spent a lot of time in prayer and calling on God for wisdom and for strength. And I've been reading through the Bible with a few friends, and we started in Matthew months ago, and now we're reading in Numbers. And at first, I was struggling. It was kind of hard. It was all about the tent of meeting, and they were counting everyone, and about the tabernacle and the tribes, and I was just feeling kind of dull spiritually. And I think some of it has to do with COVID and just that things had been, longer than I thought they would. But I needed something new spiritually. It wasn't meeting my needs. So I tried pulling out a couple different books, and it just wasn't enough for me. I needed something more. And I don't know if any of you have felt similarly. It's just been weird times. And sometimes I just need to do something different to remain in the vine, like John 15:4 talks about. So I found a plan on the Bible app that talks about a chapter in Numbers every day, and it's been so helpful, and it's really challenged me. And during this time of COVID, it can be tempting to get lazy or dull in our quiet times. It can be hard to be motivated. I was talking to another sister, and she was just sharing with me how she'd been feeling kind of sad, and she didn't totally know why. There have been good things going on in her life, but the more we talked and the more she shared, she wondered if maybe her quiet times were part of it, like her times with God daily, wondering if maybe something different would help. And she's feeling a little stuck too. And it just helped to talk about it. It helped to share what both of us were going through. So I'm going to share some of what I've been learning from the book of Numbers. And there have really been so many great lessons, but I'm just going to share 4 quick ones. And the first one is God is leading us. Are we paying attention? The next part is God takes grumbling seriously. Humility is crucial, and we need to trust God, not just ourselves. So turn with me to Numbers 10, and I'm going to read verses 11 through 13. So in verse 11, it says, on the 20th day of the 2nd month of the 2nd year, the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle of the covenant law. Then the Israelites set out from the desert of Sinai and traveled from place to place until the cloud came to rest in the desert of Paran. They set out the first time at the Lord's command through Moses. So how amazing it would have been to have God show them when to go and where. He was guiding them so clearly. It was in the sky. But the chapter goes on to tell them the order of how they should go and how they should move out and who should carry what. And we need to pay attention when God is guiding us as well. It can be tempting to get lazy in these times and not want to move when God is calling us to, or maybe we don't like the job God has given us at this time. They had to move each part of the tabernacle, and there was a specific way to do it. But for now, for us, maybe your job's encouraging people, calling them, and you don't like the phone. You'd rather meet in person, and that just might not be possible for you right now. Or maybe he's directing you to reach out to your neighbor, but that takes some extra effort or some extra, uncomfortability potentially. I thought by now we would be back to a more normal life, and that his call to move would be something more like what I've experienced for the last 28 years as a Christian. But it's not the same right now, though, is it? And we're going to need to listen to God more closely to where he's calling us, where he's guiding us, because it's going to look different. Maybe he's calling us to be more creative. God is leading, but are we paying attention? I think is the main point from this chapter. But the second lesson I want to share about is from Numbers 11. And I'm going to read verse 1. It says, "For the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then the fire from the Lord burned against them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp." Now, God was not happy that they were complaining, was he? And honestly, if you think about all the things that God had just done for them, I'd be angry too if I were God, They're complaining after he'd provided for them for so many different things. And I think it's important for us to realize God takes our grumbling seriously. God hears our grumbling too. Their grumbling caused a fire to break out around the camp. That's not small. But in our own lives, the same can be true. We grumble and it can spread like crazy. It infects our heart, but it also infects the people around us. And honestly, for them, thank goodness Moses prayed. In verse 2, it says, "When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord and the fire died down." God put the fire out because of Moses' prayer. But they still didn't learn the lesson, honestly. If we go down to verse 4, it says, "The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said, 'If only we had meat to eat.' They remembered the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never eat anything but this manna." They hadn't learned their lesson. They grumbled again so quickly. They'd been slaves. It wasn't like they were feasting in Egypt. How they remembered things got very twisted for them. I think the same can happen to us. We forget. We only see what's right in front of us. Having Jesus daily should be enough for us. We should be longing to draw closer to him, and times like now should draw us closer to him, not cause us to complain. So then down in verse 10, it says, "Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance to their tents. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled." The complaining had spread. It's all over the camp. But what's funny then here in verse 11, Moses starts complaining about the problem as well. So he asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me. Give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me." Moses complains. And it's all about I, right? He keeps saying that. I can't do this. I can't do that. Who told you that you have to carry all these people by yourself? Is God's response. And God gave him a solution, working through the other people. In verses 16 and 17, it talks about how Moses is supposed to appoint 70 people and they help lead the tribes. And we need each other in the same way, right? We need to help each other focus on God and not on ourselves. And it really helps us not to complain. So then in verses 22 and 23, God says, "Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them?" The Lord answered Moses, "Is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not I say will come true for you." God's arm is not too short to save, right? He is so strong, and they needed to get their eyes back on God. And truly, if manna wasn't enough for them, it's true for us. God's manna's got to be enough for us. What he provides needs to be enough. So the next lesson that I've gotten out of Numbers is about humility, that it's just crucial. In chapter 12, God is so clear about Moses' humility. In verses 1 and 2, it says, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. Verse 3 says, Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. You know, God said Moses was humble. Not Moses saying, wow, I'm so humble, but God called Moses humble. So then verses 4 through 10, God clarifies with them how special Moses is. So in verse 4, it says, At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, Come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. So the three of them went out. The Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, Listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, revealed myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why, then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the Lord's anger burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. God took it seriously that they grumbled against Moses. But then in verse 13, Moses asks for her healing. He loved her. He was so humble, He wasn't bitter or angry that they spoke. And I think sometimes it's a good heart check for me to think about humility. And am I grumbling? Am I feeling like things aren't fair or are fair? I don't know, in different situations. But humility and contentment go hand in hand, don't they? Contentment only comes when you're humble. And the desert was all about trusting and following. It was about being humble and not trying to get their own way. And the last lesson is we need to trust God, not just ourselves. And it comes from chapter 13 and 14. And at the beginning of 13, God changes Hoshea's name to Joshua, which means the Lord saves. And I think it probably is because he needed to know that only the Lord saves, not himself. Hosea means save. So he wanted him to remember it's only God that saves. So compare God's instructions here at the beginning of chapter 13 to Moses' instructions. So in verse 1 of chapter 13, it says, The Lord said to Moses, Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. And he goes on just saying, explore the land. Like, I'm giving it to you, just go explore. And then Moses had a little bit more to say about it. In chapters 17 through 20, he tells them, go to the Negev and into the hill country, see what the land is like, whether the people live there are strong or weak, few or many. Like, he's got a lot more questions of things he wants them to look for. And I think sometimes the same can be true of us. We get anxious for the future. We want to know the details, but God doesn't give us the details. He just gives us the promise that he has a plan. And then in verse 27, it says, They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which he sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there, the Amalekites who live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. They saw the land is just as it was promised, but then they got focused on the big, the big scary people, or, all the different people that could alter the plan. But then in verse 30, Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, We should go up and take possession of the land, for certainly we can do it. But the men who had gone up with them said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." Caleb had so much faith. He believed God. And I think God calls us the same way, right? We need to walk by faith, not by sight. They saw themselves as grasshoppers, it says later. They'd taken their eyes off God. And we need to hear the word. We need to see the past giants and see the invisible God. I think about, what if Moses had actually listened to Caleb? How much the people would have been spared if they had just listened. And we can be those people that can breathe faith into the people around us. We can help. We really can make a difference. We can help people see the blessings that God may be planning. He may already have things laid out for us, right? But then in chapter 14, we have the opportunity of, how are we going to respond? Are we going to be faithful and try and help the people the way God is leading, or doubt God's plan and hold back? In chapter 14, it goes on and talks about, are they going to follow? Are you confident that God will do what he promised? Or do we view the trial as too big, or and we're too small, or that the situation is hopeless? They've seen the power of God, and will they trust their fears more than God? When the present's hard, don't look to the past, look forward, look to the future. You'll trip if you keep looking backwards, right? We need to trust God and not ourselves. So let's read verses 1 through 4 of chapter 14. It says, "That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, 'If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and our children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?' And they said to each other, 'We should choose a leader to go back to Egypt.'" Here they are complaining again and letting their fear run their actions. They're taking their eyes off God completely and continue to complain. And then in verse 5, it says, "Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes." They understood how big doubting God is, the serious nature of it. They tore their clothes. And really, the only thing that matters in trials is keeping our eyes focused on God, remembering God's promises. In verse 7, it says, right after they tore their clothes, "and said to the entire Israelite assembly, 'The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them.'" They still tried to remind them of how powerful God was, what he had promised them. God brings us through trials. He brings us closer to him through trials, and he brings us into the promised land. They'd lived on God's manna. He'd sustained them, protected them. God has done the same for us. He strengthens us and protects us. But are we quick, to forget and take our eyes off God? Moses, again, intercedes for them with God. God saves them, but they don't get to enter the promised land. And I felt like God has been telling me to listen to him, to not complain, to trust him. And I don't want to show this kind of contempt for God or get angry about his plan. I want to embrace it. Even though it looks really different than I wanted it to, I want this verse in Hebrews to be able to be true of me. In Hebrews 10, it says, "But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and are saved." That's Hebrews 10:39. Hopefully this study in Numbers was helpful for you. It really has been encouraging to study it out, and I hope it's something that really ministers to your heart. Amen.